I'm Bruce Fletcher, by the way. I'm a co-president of the Stow Historical Society. This is Dorcas Sefton, my other co-president, and Kelly Lawler, one of our treasurers. We have multiples of every role. And so Kelly, first I'd like to say I'm thrilled to be collaborating with the Boxborough Historical Society. And I'd like to introduce Cheryl Mahoney, Vice President of the Boxborough Historical Society.
So, my fellow members and myself are too short. All right. Are very excited to be here tonight. We'd like to thank the Stow Historical Society for inviting us to participate in this joint event and hope that this is the first of many to come. I'm joined tonight by our president, Kate West, and board member Duncan Brown, along with several of our regular members. Thank you for coming tonight through the wonderful spring weather. We would also like to acknowledge the Chester family for making this history that we're celebrating tonight. We had the privilege of being able to provide several presentations in recent years. The Cate Taylor Chester African Experience in Colonial and Revolutionary Massachusetts in '04, presented by Barbara Tornstrom, who unfortunately was unable to join us tonight. And then in the height of COVID, we put together a video presentation for Black History Month called Making History 1742 to Today, Cate and Taylor Prince Chester. I'd like to recognize my husband, who helped me to co-author that particular presentation. And with events like this, we hope to reaffirm a commitment to preserving history for all Americans and to protect their legacy. In closing, we also were privileged enough to have a copy of the National Park Service's report, Patriots of Color and Peculiar Beauty and Merit, and we invite you to review it as we socialize after the presentation. Thank you. And now Kelly's going to.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. My name is Kelly Lawler, and I serve on two nonprofits in town. A volunteer on the Stow Historical Society and also Rediscover Mapledale. So both have the same goals to preserve the history of Stow. Tonight we have a lot of people to thank to make this event a free event for the public. So first of all, this is a Hidden Treasures event from Freedom's Way National Heritage Area. The program is offered by the Stow Historical Society and the Boxborough Historical Society as part of the Hidden Treasures Festival of Nature, Culture, and History, an annual month-long celebration showcasing events and activities hosted by the local partners, celebrating the unique places, objects, and stories of the Freedom's Way National Heritage Area. Hidden Treasures programs are always free and open to the public, and I just attended one at Steel Farm in Boxborough. So as you can see on our flyer, we'd also like to thank the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington and Tricon's 2 Red Tails. So we are in for a treat tonight. There's a special screening of the Black residents of Lexington, wait for it, Stow and Boxborough. And so we are going to learn about some amazing patriots today, Prince and Cate Chester, and I am just here to present our speakers. So just give me a minute to read their bios, and then we'll have them come up together or separate. Or just do Q&A after. Okay, all right. Awesome. Okay, all right. Okay, great. All right. Well, we have some amazing visitors that are here tonight to be our presenters, and I just want to tell you a little bit about their experience and expertise. Margaret Micholet was a historian for the National Park Service, during which time she wrote A History of the Commandant's House at the Charlestown Navy Yard, 1803 to 1972. She did research on the African Meeting House on Beacon Hill during the time it was being restored by the National Park Service. Margaret served on the Lexington Historical Society's Slavery Interpretation Advisory Group. She also wrote the brochure, Slavery in Colonial Lexington, which I use as a teacher in Lexington, which is carried in the historic houses owned by the Lexington Historical Society and then the Lexington Visitor Center. In addition, she provided research for 2 Lexington Historical Society exhibits on African American people in colonial Lexington, and Venus Rowe, an enslaved child of Lexington, Massachusetts, is part of Margaret's original research in African American history, going back as far as her undergraduate years when she wrote The United Order of True Reformers and the first Black bank in the United States. She is currently researching Cate Chester, another enslaved child who spent part of her adult life in Lexington after gaining her freedom. Margaret holds both undergraduate and graduate degrees from the College of William and Mary. And let's just hold our applause. Sean Osborne is a public historian who enjoys sharing his research through stories and exhibitions. He has performed in schools, museums, and the workplace. Mr. Osborne is also a collaborative problem solver. He is the founder and principal of OSD Engineering Consultants. OSD is a veteran-owned consulting firm that provides resiliency planning, workforce training, and infrastructure design services for municipal clients in New England. He earned his BS in Civil Engineering degree from Princeton University and an MS in Civil Engineering degree from UMass Lowell. He holds a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace Certificate from the University of South Florida. Mr. Osborne is the co-founder and past president of the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington's, or ABCL, and was recognized in 2021 as the Black Excellence on the Hill honoree for the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. As ABCL historian, he continues to research and create programs for the organization's Black History Project of Lexington. As owner of Tricons to Red Tails, a multi-platform production company, he creates programs highlighting the stories of Black veterans and their communities. Sean Osborne started the successful campaign to create Massachusetts Emancipation Day with letters to the editor, which were printed in the Boston Herald and the Lexington Minuteman in June of 2020. An act designating July 8th as Massachusetts Emancipation Day, but also known as Quack Walker Day, was signed then by Governor Baker on November 1st of 2022. He is now working with the New England chapter of Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated to get an act establishing the 4th Thursday of March as Tuskegee Airmen Commemoration Day passed during the current Massachusetts State Legislative session. So we are honored to introduce both of our historians here today. Thank you.
I'll have a lot to say after, but I do want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. This project, the Black Patriots of Lexington, is one of the passion projects for the 250th. The 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord. One of the things that I noticed when I moved to Lexington in the 90s and then moved to Stow and then moved back to Lexington was that the idea of Black soldiers was foreign to many people. That's part of why you have George Quintal's book. That's part of why we still have the conversation about who are the Tuskegee Airmen, and we have this push to have Tuskegee Airmen Appreciation Day. If we don't know how the country was founded, then we have stories about the direction of the country that we lose. If we don't know that Black soldiers, enslaved, indentured, or free, were paid the same as white soldiers, indentured or free, then we lose that people got it right and then change their minds. Thus, we too can change our minds. If we know that Peter Salem and Salem Poor did great things, then we don't ask the question about, do black people have the valor to fight as we did in every war after the Revolutionary War? So history and public memory are very, very important to what we do today. So when Margaret and I were talking about this project, she is one of several experts who helped to mold this project. She told me about two of her loves, Venus Rowe and Cate Chester. And then she came back and told me more about their loves, and more and more and more and more. Through her insistence, we broaden the story, right? Soldiers are important. Soldiers are very important. The families of soldiers are important. The neighbors of soldiers are important. Well, hold on. We had other parts of the revolution. We also had an economic part of the revolution. We had this separation. Well, how do we do this separation? How do we do this boycott without people like Cate and Prince? How do we have this discussion about the spinning bees? That's always white women. When there were black women also who were spinning. As you go into the research of spinning of flax and hemp, then you realize that in certain parts of the United States in the 1800s, enslaved people were not only spinning for their enslavers, they also were spinning for themselves. So hold on. So that means enslaved people on plantations were building their shelter, growing the flax, and then spinning the flax so they then could sew and repair their own clothing. What exactly did we get out of this? Right? So the question of, oh, but black folks were taken care of, you go, well, no, they weren't. In the same way, you come back to the details and you say, okay, Prince and Cate Chester, where were they? Why were they? Oh, Prince Chester was enslaved in Lexington? That's impossible. Not the cradle of liberty. There would never be enslaved people there. Cate Chester was enslaved in Stow? Never. No one lived here. I mean, sorry. Right? So you build upon the facts to create the story. And then you ask, but why is this enslaved person in Stow living in Lexington to meet Prince? Oh, enslaved people are more than just enslaved people. They have lives. They have wants. They have desires. They want to have families. And the story that you're going to hear, thanks to Margaret Micholet, is about what love can do. And one of the things love can do is it can create children, and children create children, and children create children, until we end up with a descendant here with us in the room. Please stand. And that's why we do this. Because there are great stories all around us. I know we have folks, friends and members and board members of historical societies in here, because it's great to talk to the choir. But it's telling those stories that excites us, right? And excites our audiences. And one of the stories that you should also know is we have another descendant of an enslaved couple from Lexington, because there are very few communities that only enslave one person. Some will tell you we only had one on record because we didn't count anyone under 16. Or some other, they were visiting, it wasn't really ours. All kinds of ways to have the exceptions. So let's question that rule, and let's think about Margaret and Robin, or robbing Tulip from Lexington. And we have another descendant living in Massachusetts. Please stand. And I invite you, after we've watched the video, to, sure, you'll be able to hear from the esteemed Margaret Micholet. But also think about the other stories that come out of this, because that's part of this project. We have the banners, we have the series, and we also have a group of storytellers in training. And those storytellers are taking on the stories of the Black folks, the white folks, and the indigenous folks that are featured in the series and are part of the fabric of those communities. So we have people who are telling the stories of the enslavers, telling the stories of some of the customers, telling the stories of different people. And one of those storytellers is Kelly. She was amazing. No, so the idea is for you to think about, how do you tell these stories? How do you share these stories? How do you bring these stories to the communities, to the senior centers, to the classrooms, to the festivals, so that people understand that Black folks and their neighbors were here? And as our friend in the video who couldn't make it would tell you, so that we have the volunteers. I will ask you this question. Have you ever seen a Black reenactor doing either one of those things when you have gone to any of the living villages in Maine or Massachusetts or Virginia or Pennsylvania or anywhere else? Anyone? Where? Where in Virginia? Williamsburg? I'm there for you. New Brunswick, what? Wow, that's outstanding. What time period were they doing? What time period were they doing? Civil War. Interesting. New Brunswick. Okay. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Skip the century. So need more. Yeah, need more. And when I try to recruit people, they ask the question, but Black folks didn't do that. Well, did they? When I was recruited to be a Lexington Minuteman, I said, outside of Prince Estabrook, who was there? They're like, Well, there were others, right? There was Eli and Silas Burdew, Lexingtonians, on April 19th. You can invite people in, give them the story, have them do that. In the same way you can say, why would anyone, which is a question I have for you, because I don't have the answer, Why would anyone go through the process of manumission and stay in that community? So with that thought, we will start the video, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and delicious baked goods. Thank you. Hello, my name is Sean Osborne, and welcome to the Black Patriots of Lexington. Lexington, Massachusetts, the birthplace of liberty, the site of the first armed conflict of the American Revolution. Lexington, the home of black residents since it was known as Cambridge Farms. Some of those black residents owned property and paid taxes. Others were enslaved or indentured. Many of them played vital roles in the founding of the United States of America. Scholars estimate that at least 50 black men responded to the Lexington Alarm and engaged the British regulars on April 19, 1775. 3 of those men were from Lexington, Prince Esterbrook and cousins Eli and Silas Purdue. 2 other men are known to have fought in Lexington, Caesar Ferret and his son, John Ferret. Both served with the Natick Militia. And over 2,000 black patriots from Massachusetts served between 1775 and 1783. Today, we will explore the life and times of Cate and Prince Chester, black patriots who helped to make colonial America independent by helping to produce linen as colonists were boycotting British goods in response to the Stamp Act of 1765. While Cate was not a member of the Daughters of Liberty and Prince was not a member of the Sons of Liberty, their labor was part of the resistance to taxation without representation. Our guides on this exploration of the incredible lives of Cate and Prince Chester are Margaret Micholet and Michelle Parrish. Welcome, Margaret and Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, this idea of making cloth out of plant fiber, that seems strange to me as someone who grew up thinking about loincloths and only using the sinews of animals and their skins for clothing. How long have humans been so ingenious to take plant fibers and to weave them together?
Mm-hmm. Well, the oldest example of flax that we has been carbon dated is about 35,000 years old. So the use of flax as a textile plant to make string or cordage is very, very old, upper Paleolithic or Neolithic at least. So yeah, people have been very innovative and creative in using the natural resources around them for thousands of years.
So I'd heard that one of the ways that the Western Europeans learned to make linen out of flax was through the Romans coming into Egypt. Have you seen any of that research about the connection between Egypt and the Roman Empire?
Hundreds of thousands of years, or at least tens of thousands. So the oldest known example of flax fiber that's been dated is about 35,000 years old, from Eastern Europe, sort of Western Asia. But it's the use of plants to make fibers, and specifically flax, has spread through different cultures around the world over the past, several 35,000 years.
So Eastern Europe, Mesopotamia, the Nile Delta, those sort of the centers of the ancient world that we know of that had flax and linen.
Yep. And other fibers in other parts of the world, but the flax is fairly temperate climate type of plant, so it does well in those areas.
So of all the things to bring with them, right, why would they bring a flaxseed?
Right. So the Latin name for flax is Linum usatitissimum, which means the most useful. And literally every part of the plant is useful, starting with the seeds. So if you eat any kind of baked goods with flaxseed on them, for example, the seeds are useful for eating, also for pressing for oil. So flaxseed oil or linseed oil is incredibly useful as a paint ingredient, all kinds of uses for that. And fun fact, this is not historical for New England, but the linoleum is also a product made from flax and linen. So you can use the fibers and press it. So it had historical uses and still today is like a very, very valuable, useful product. So yes, the Europeans would have brought it as like a real mainstay of their textile production.
And I believe also they would use some of the, is it called tow? They'd use that with pitch.
Yeah, every single part. I can tell you, I can show you a little bit more about that. But yes, there's as you process the plant, you get higher quality fiber and sort of lower grade fiber, but every single part of it is useful, the most useful.
And so you could use that from making ships waterproof to also filling the holes in your house.
Exactly, right. So tow could be mixed with linseed oil or this pitch or something like that. That's waterproof and used to caulk ships. That was called oakum. And for putting, helping to make the bungholes of barrels waterproof. It's very versatile.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. So people were bringing the material to build a successful colony with them, as opposed to just assuming that they'd have everything they needed wherever they ended up trying to create a community.
Yes, exactly. So growing flax and as well as hemp, which we're not going to talk about today, but growing flax and hemp were, as well as wool for textiles, all of those were important parts of textile production. And England, of course, had a very well-established wool industry. They were not eager to have the colonists develop their own wool industry, but we can maybe get into that a little bit later. But yes, flax was an important part of textile production for European colonists, for sure.
That's great. So, Margaret, we now come to the 1700s with Prince and Cate. So, as I understand it, Prince was enslaved in Lexington. Can you tell me about that part of his life?
Well, we know that he was born about 1738. He doesn't show up in the written record specifically named until his baptism in 1761. He was enslaved by Samuel Stone. Samuel Stone came into Lexington after his father died, who also named Samuel, interestingly enough. So he comes from out of town, if you will. Did he have Prince at the time? Not sure. Prince, an enslaved person, shows up on the record in 1745, which is the next year after Samuel Stone comes in. Prince would have been 7 years old at the time. Young children were typically not reported on tax rolls, so it's a little unclear if that person that he claimed was actually Prince. We do know, as I said, once he gets to the baptismal record, he's about 20 years old, and we know that's Prince.
So for all residents 16 and older, you're counted, whether you're enslaved or born free. 16 is a typical cutoff for knowing who's in the household. I believe that the Stone property, you told me, is somewhere on the Lincoln-Lexington border. Is that correct?
It's in that general direction. The original land grant was 600 acres, so it was a very large piece of property. The Stones were among the first families to come into Cambridge Farms. So
1600s.
Yes. Gregory was the first landowner. By the time it gets down to Samuel, because there were three Samuels before Samuel, by the time it comes down to that, he has occupied part of the land, and the descendants of one of the sons, David, are in another place. This Samuel is basically around where Stone Meadow Golf Course is, which, if people thought that was just a fun name for a golf meadow, no, it was Stone's Meadow. So that's basically where Samuel Stone was living.
Right. And so you have this land that's 600 acres has been split up, and generation comes down. We have the Samuel Stone household near that encompasses Stone Meadow. We have Prince there. He ends up becoming a free man in and around 1760, 63, 50s. Do you have a sense of when he becomes free?
Between 1761 and 1769, when he comes into the record via Reverend Clarke's diary. We only know that he was a free man before 1768. I don't know what happened to him prior to that. I can say definitively that he was free because Samuel Stone left a will, and he is not inventoried in the will. I don't know why he was freed. I don't know how long he had been free, but by 1769, which was basically the year Samuel Stone's will was promulgated, he was being hired by Reverend Jonas Clarke. At that time in the diary, Prince is listed as Prince Stone, which is interesting. So Prince did take the name Chester at some point, but at that point, at least according to what Reverend Clarke knew, that he was Samuel Stone. So interesting. Excuse me, Prince Stone.
So Prince goes from having no last name, as many enslaved people did, to taking on the last name of his enslaver, which wasn't uncommon. And then at some point between being known as Prince Stone and the marriage and baptism, which we'll talk about later on, he has his own name that he has chosen instead.
Yes, and I'm not at all sure he actually chose the name Stone for himself. It's how people were known, typically. So it's something more, I believe, that Clarke named him. Prince shows up shortly thereafter in 1772 in a marriage with Cate Chester. And that's when he definitely shows up as Prince Chester. Mm-hmm.
So in the notes from Reverend Clarke, why is he in there? What is he paying Prince for a service?
Yes, he's paying Prince to prepare raw flax for the spinning wheel. In 1769, there was great fervor among the colonies. There were a lot of things called spinning bees, which produced a certain amount of flax. Somebody like Reverend Clarke, who was very much involved in the whole life of the town and the community, would have been interested in having somebody prepare flax so that he could have it ready for the weaver.
Who were the people in the colonies that prepared flax? Was this one of those cottage industries that people did with specialists, or how was that done?
So processing flax is a lot of work, and I'll be able to show a little demonstration in just a minute. But yeah, pretty much it's the kind of labor that could have been done in a household as unpaid labor. It's the kind of labor that could have been done by enslaved people as unpaid labor. It's also the kind of labor that could have been done by someone who specialized and could have gotten paid for it, just as we hear that Prince was paid to do that work. So it's such a kind of ubiquitous job for, especially in rural or farming communities, all different kinds of people could have been engaged in it.
And before you see the demonstrations, could you walk us through just the planting to is it the retting process?
Yes, okay. Sure. I'd be happy to do that. So in what we now call New England, flax is typically planted in April. It's one of the earliest crops that you can get in the ground as soon as the soil is workable. It's traditionally broadcast, which means just kind of spread out the same way you'd plant a wheat or another grain crop. And there were acres under cultivation at the time period that we're talking about today. Then it's about 90 days till the crop is ready to harvest, and it goes through a growth period. It typically gets about 3 feet tall, and the most common flower color is blue, a beautiful shade of blue. It also comes in white and some other colors. And then after the sort of big flush of flowering, the plants will start to set seed. Then to harvest the crop, it's traditionally pulled up by the roots. And then that's when, and then it's dried. Then people would have certainly saved the seed, so remove the seed from the plants before the rest of the processing occurred. Then you do have to do a process called retting, which is a controlled rotting process. And we were just discussing, there were 2 kind of primary ways of doing this. You could do ground retting or dew retting, which produces a sort of grayish or brownish tone to the fiber. And that's, if you want the technical details, there's a fungal process where the fungi colonize the plant and separate the different stalks of the plant, so that the fiber can be released from the other parts of the plant stock. Or you can do a process called water retting or pond retting, where you soak the stalks of the plant in a tank of water or a pond. Both of these were practiced in New England, and you can see you get a slightly different tone to the fiber once it's finished, but really the goal is the same. With water retting, it's bacteria that colonize the stalks of the plant, and in both cases, whether it's fungi or bacteria, you're really trying to get rid of the pectins, which are holding the layers of the stalk together to release the fiber, and this is kind of what you're going for, is spinnable fiber.
So with Lexington in a community with a lot of wetlands at the time, and rivers, it probably would have gone with water retting since it was so available.
That's my hunch. I can't say for sure, but there are definitely retting ponds that are in the record in New England. That would be my guess. But obviously, maybe some historians can find out if there was a flax retting pond somewhere around here.
And that's one of the beautiful things about these conversations, is that there's subsets of specialties about colonial history that need more people to get engaged and to answer these questions, so that we can uncover those answers, because it's not that we are finding new information, it's just that we're looking for it in the same sources in a different way.
Exactly. There is always more to know.
So do you want to show us what happens after you read?
Sure, I'd be happy to. All right. So the tool I'm standing by here is called a flax brake. It's used for smashing up the stalks of the fiber. And as I was describing earlier, I have 2 examples. This was water retted. So you see that lighter color on the stalks of the plant. And this was dew retted, and you see the sort of darker color here. And you can also get a sense of how tall the plant was at the time that it was harvested, and a little bit of the seed pods left over at the top of the stalk there.
Wow.
It's a pretty, it's a multi-step job, and it's a lot of work. I'm just gonna take a portion of this bundle here. So the first step after retting is to use the brake to smash up the stock. And can you hear that sound actually? That crunching sound is the sort of woody part of the plant material shattering and falling down onto the ground.
So there's no waste. So what happens to stuff on the ground?
Right. So all of that stuff down there has many, many uses. It's flammable, so you can use it for fire starter, compostable, could be used for, people ask me if it was used for animal bedding. I'm honestly not sure about that. Okay, so we can start to see already here, that's kind of speed things up a little bit here. But you can start to see the fibers are coming loose already from the plant. So I would keep sort of using the brake until the fibers start to come loose and all the woody material is smashed up here. Just to kind of move us along here.
And so you're mentioning, I think that sometimes this needs to be used for bedding and for pillows, as well as for, that'd be the more coarser material be used for that, not the finer material for bedding and pillows.
The stuff that's going to come off, the short pieces, that's called tow. That could be used for all kinds of purposes. I certainly could have been stuffing, or for making coarser quality textiles. You can also spin a pretty nice fiber, pretty nice yarn out of tow, if you really clean it up nicely. But it was, I think, often seen for coarser textiles. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit
That's
of
amazing.
cleaning it up here. All right, so now instead of just a pile of sticks, we have clearly some fiber. The next step is called scutching or swingling. And these terms come from different cultures in Europe where the traditions were brought over to what's now New England. So I'm going to use a tool called a scutching knife or a scutching sword. They come in a lot of different shapes and styles. Just in the interest of our range of motion here, I'm going to use a shorter one. So the next step is to literally whack the preparation here and remove the rest of the what's called shives, the woody material. Any small pieces that break off at this point would also be considered tow. And, you know, you could collect them up at the end. They'll be falling down to the ground below. And just keep working this until you've removed as much of the shives as possible.
So you were doing this quickly for the demonstration as someone who's getting paid, as Prince was. Would he go as quickly? Would he go slower for higher quality, or how would that work?
Right. So, you know, when you read the primary source materials, people so this whole process is referred to as dressing. Pounds a day, right? This probably weighs, I don't know, what you think, 2 ounces maybe?
Right. Okay. So
they're doing a lot. They're cranking through pretty quickly. And certainly a skilled worker would get a better product in the end. So that would be the reason maybe you would pay someone to do it. But a lot of the quality also depends on how successful your retting process was. If it's under-retted or over-retted, you're going to run in, meaning the decomposition wasn't sufficient or it went too far, then you're going to run into a problem with the quality of your fiber.
So it's important along the entire process that you have good artisans along the way, because it all affects your final product.
Exactly. The more skillful the person, the better quality of a product you're going to get at the end of the process, and the less loss, less sort of tow or debris. Okay, so then the last step in this process, the dressing process, is called hetchling or hackling.
Okay.
And I'm going to step over to this side and just so this tool has a cover because the tines are extremely sharp. They're very, very sharp metal tines that are embedded in a wooden board. And what we're going to be doing here is trying to separate the long and the short fibers. So I'm just gonna gently draw the fibers across the tines. The short fibers you can see are getting pulled away. So this is toe. You could set that aside and save it. But what we're going for is what's known as line. And that's the sort of higher quality spinning fibers that would be spun to make the better quality textile. So keep going. Try not to stab yourself.
So you want to go quickly but safely.
Yep, exactly. So the one I'm using on this side is the tines are a little bit farther apart, a little bit larger. This would be considered a coarse hetchel or hackle. And then just for the sake of timeliness here, I'm not gonna spend too much longer on this one, but then, and you'd keep working from the ends toward the center till you've cleaned out all of the fiber. Then you can move to a finer hetchel where the tines are a little closer together and a little finer. And then continue to draw the fiber through the hetchels until, again, you've cleaned up all the way through the whole bundle. Then this finished preparation of fiber is ready for spinning. You would twist it up and set it aside. It's called a strick. And then the next step after this would be spinning.
So you weigh the strick, and that's what you get paid by. Was the weight of the strick itself, not the? It's the final product you get paid. You get paid for.
Yes, and actually, it's interesting. I think I don't know about Prince specifically and what the record says, but it could be the weight of the fiber, or sometimes it was a certain number of hours that people worked, or like a morning or part of a day, or depended on the terms of the contract.
And then these all look like relatively easy carpentry to make. Would the artisans make their own, or would they go to a store and buy this? How would that work?
Right. So I think, again, there's a range. This kind of a tool would involve a blacksmith, most likely. So unless a person did have blacksmithing skills, I don't think they'd be making their own hetchels.
Okay.
Hetchel making is a subset of blacksmith's work. But some of these other tools are clearly, if you have basic woodworking skills or joinery skills, a brake and a sketching board, sketching knives isn't difficult. So I'm not sure that would have been a specialist job to make those.
So as a startup job, starting a new business, you could use your own handiwork until you get to here, and then you pay for that portion. So it's something that you could work your way into in terms of easy to buy your way in without being an apprentice, as opposed to being a blacksmith where you have to be apprentice in order to open up shop.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it's a more considered like a general labor, general type of labor, not necessarily specialist. Although again, some people like Prince in this case, were highly skilled enough that they would be paid for it, not just work on the farm kind of thing.
That's great. And then after this is done, there are processes we're going to discuss a little bit later, but could you just give us a overview of what happens after we make this?
So this is called line, yep, or a strick of, so this isn't really finished all the way, but you already get a sense it's, some of the sheen is there for a nice quality fiber, and then next step after this would be spinning.
This would be the more,
which I think we're
finished.
gonna be, yes, exactly.
Right.
So this has been cleaned up pretty much as I could get it. There's a
So
little,
you did that work.
yes. There's little bits of shives left in this that the spinner needs to sort of flick away and get rid of as they spin. But and then with toe cloth, sometimes the shives are actually left in the cloth all the way to the finished woven product. It could be very coarse, very scratchy. Read reports, especially lower quality materials being very uncomfortable to wear because they were very scratchy.
Okay, because I've seen reports about scratchy linen shirts being worn by young enslaved boys in the 1800s.
Yes, exactly.
okay.
Yeah, so there's a famous reference in Booker T. Washington's autobiography about how wearing this type of linen fabric was so painful. He was indebted or very appreciative to a brother or sibling that would wear the fabric and sort of break it in for him before Booker T had to wear it. And so, yeah, the coarser, harsher fabrics were, you see references in that's was used as like clothing for enslaved people. Whereas, again, you can make a much finer, very soft, this is linen, for example. You can get beautiful,
Right.
lustrous, fine fabric out of the same plant material.
So linen could be used for matting, for coarse fabric, or for finer fabric, and it's a matter of the time that's taken along the process to take out more of the impurities.
Yes, and also, sometimes the fiber quality itself can vary. So, people would have been sorting their coarser fiber from their finer fiber, and then sort of putting it toward the use that they thought was most, suitable.
And then for the colonists, especially the colonial military, they had a lot of wool and fiber in their clothing as well.
Certainly. In fact, there's it's after the American Revolution, but I recently saw a reference to a certain amount of domestically produced linen that the Army bought compared to imported sort of European produced linen that the Army bought. But yeah, definitely woolen and linen fabrics, they're the kind of high performance fabrics of their day.
And then how much of how many of these would you need to, say, knit your shirt?
That is a great question. So we can maybe there's some spun skeins over there, and we can, when we get to talking about Cate and her work, we can talk about that a little bit. But I don't know. I think you'd probably need maybe 15 or 20 like this to make a shirt or a garment that's useful. Yeah.
So it's specialized work, and you need a community to grow.
Definitely.
To grow the plants, to process the plants, and then to weave and make the fabric.
Yep. And then someone still has to sew that fabric into their shirt. And,
Right.
many steps, lots of work.
They didn't discuss dyeing it, but yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the demonstration. That was wonderful. Appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome.
So that's the Prince side. He's doing all that work. Let's talk a little bit about Cate. So
Yes.
can you tell me about how Cate ends up in her life before Lexington and her life in Lexington?
Cate was purchased for a box of butter as a 3-year-old child in Boston. She was brought home about 26 miles into the hinterlands, if you will, by her enslaver, Phineas Taylor. She grew up in this household, Dorothy and Phineas. They had what turned out to be 5 living children. She was in the same age group as the older children. Those children, the ones who survived, there were 2 girls who didn't survive any length of time. They were boys, and they would be doing boys' work on the farm with the father, Phineas. Cate was the only girl child, enslaved, but the only girl child to be in that community or that family. And she worked with Dorothy, doing all of the things that a woman would do in the context of that. I want to emphasize that Cate was 3 when she was enslaved. This is horrific, but it was not uncommon in New England at all.
And so one of the things, to reinforce that is that there are many ways that enslaved people got to New England. Sometimes it was direct from Africa. Sometimes it was at a way station, like Cape Verde. Sometimes it was through an exchange of enslaved Native peoples and enslaved Africans in the Caribbean. And so it's all about how much profit you can make from these people in bondage. And it's hard to make money, off of children. And so
Exactly.
pre-8 years old, what do we do with you? And so you end up separating the children from their parents so the parents can focus on making money for their enslavers. So she ends up out in Stow, and then comes to Lexington, and somehow she and Prince meet and decide to get married. And in the context of this time period, we now have the church saying we will perform the marriages of enslaved people with the understanding that the two enslaved people will arrive at the ceremony and their enslavers are there as witnesses, because the two adults don't have a relationship outside of their enslavement that they control. And the child or children of that relationship also is not reared by them as we think of parenting. Instead, they are just a potential source of income. And so you have this three parties. You have the husband, the wife, and the children, none of whom work as a family unit. And so they decide, we don't want that. We want to be two free people who get married. So how does that happen with Cate?
Well, it's really interesting. Cate was manumitted on the 7th of April of 1773. She and Prince were married on the 23rd of April. Prince was already a free man. There's every indication that that was her intention before actually even getting married. So she grew up on this farm. I believe she was pretty indispensable to the work of the family as she was growing up. She managed to secure her manumission just this short period of time before she was married. I think Cate was resourceful myself.
And I'd be remiss if not adding a little detail about how resourceful she was, is because they announce their engagement while she's still enslaved.
Exactly.
And then, so now she has a deadline in her head to get this manumission paper. And it's important, to think about we talked earlier about the ingenuity of people. Whether you're making fiber and string out of plants, or you are using the rules that you find yourself to make your life better. It's ingenuity. It's work. So they get married and they have two children in Lexington who are baptized by Reverend Clarke.
Yes.
So Reverend Clarke baptizes both children, marries Cate and Prince, and then I believe he also hires Cate.
Yes. He, as we said, he hired Prince in 1769. In 1773, he hired both of them 4 times in 1773. He hired Prince to do the breaking, just as we saw, and he hired Cate to do the spinning.
Right, and so that goes back to, you talked about earlier about the importance of having the quality from the retting to the processing, to the spinning, to the weaving, right? All of that matters to the final product.
Exactly.
So what do you take from the fact that he hires them together as a team?
It's a good question. I don't know the exact, haven't spent as much time with those primary sources as you have. But, it's because there's so many steps in the process. I feel like the spinning is, not that work we were just talking about is not skilled work. Certainly Prince had, a high level of skill, agency, resourcefulness, all of those important human qualities. But spinning is a quite highly skilled task. So the sort of length of fiber I prepared over there would have been wrapped around this kind of a tool called a distaff. And honestly, spinning was so much associated with women and women's work that the term distaff is sometimes used to refer to the women's side of a family. So in terms of the sort of gendered distribution of labor at the time, I think, not that men never spun or something like that, but I think it was, like you were saying, when Cate learned all the work that a girl or a woman in the household would have done, even as an enslaved child, that was work other women would have also potentially been doing in a rural community. So spinning very fine fiber. So here's some just examples of sort of, skeins of hand spun. This is tow that's been spun, so it's a little coarser and hairier. This is that really nice line. It's a little finer, and with some bleaching could make a really, really nice fabric. So just to say, Cate's a highly skilled. You've been highly skilled, but Cate is definitely highly skilled.
Yes, and it's interesting that I think because they were more in the countryside, that Dorothy would have actually been a spinner teaching Cate, which when you get to a town like Lexington, although it wasn't big, it was a bustling town where more people would not have been doing this traditional craft. So the fact that Reverend Clarke was very interested in advancing the non-importation. He was very supportive of pushing back on these various acts that were being enacted from Great Britain. He was very interested in having his family wear linen, but they weren't going to be able to get the linen from the spinning bees because the quality of the yarn would have been much too coarse. It would have probably just broken apart. That was all for protest reasons. So the fact that Cate was employed to do this is an indication of how well she did her craft. In one of the notations, Cate was hired 4 times in 73, just as Prince was. And one of the notations in 1773 by Reverend Clarke that he had hired a Mr. Mason to do the weaving into the cloth. They're just juxtaposed. So you know that Cate was providing that fiber.
This goes back to that traditional work between the men and women at the time, where the spinning versus the weaving, in terms of the traveling, the itinerant worker like Mr. Mason would have been the weaver as the man, and the woman would have been doing the.
Yeah, it varied a little depending on the community. For example, I know in Deerfield there were Elizabeth Amazon was a woman who was a weaver, so there were certainly women weavers as well as men who were weavers in New England. But yeah, I think a lot of the just to your point that like if the minister was going for a higher quality of fabric, he would have employed someone with a higher level of skill.
Yes.
And so now we end up in 1775. In addition to the minister caring a lot about having his family wear linen, he also was urging the community to separate from the tyranny of Britain as he saw it. So, where are Prince and Cate and their 2 children in 1775? Do we have a record maybe from the census that tells us where they were?
Well, we have 2 kinds of records. We have tax records. Prince, we know, paid taxes in 73, 74, and 75. He was in Lexington at the time. We have baptismal records for their 2 oldest children, 1773 and 1774. So that's how we can locate this family at this time.
And so we have, a record that shows the poll tax, and he's paying other taxes in town. I believe that you mentioned that they were also paying non-property tax where they had land elsewhere.
All I know at this point is that he owned property in 1774. It's listed, it's a small amount of money, so that would not have been real property in Lexington. And Cate was able to negotiate a farm, small farm, in what is now Boxborough, from her previous enslaver, whose name was Phineas Taylor. Right. So I know that they had property in what is now Boxborough, and they paid property tax in Lexington, but it could not have been real property. That would have been Lexington. Personal property in Lexington. Right.
The family is there for April 19, 1775, and then they move further west, as many of the veterans from Lexington did as well over the next 10 to 20 years. Many of the folks who fought on April 19 who are from Lexington end up going further west or north to New Hampshire or Vermont. They end up settling in what is now Boxborough.
That's right.
And could you tell me about how their property multiplies over the next generation?
Well, their daughter, Lucy, who was the second child in the number of children, was able to acquire a farm on her own. So at one point, you see her father, her parents at this point, owning a farm, and then later on, of course, she would have been a child at that point, but later on, she herself owned a farm. And she had a considerable amount of property, not just real property. We have a will from her. She died in 1849, and the will is quite extensive, and it lists various things, amounts of money and property that went to various people, mostly her family. We also know from tax records in 1845 that there were 3 properties that were owned by the people in the Chester family. So these people were hardworking, and they got property.
Thank you for helping us to learn more about Prince and Cate and their lovely life, and for the research you've done. Very much appreciated. And Michelle, thank you for bringing your expertise with showing us the ingenuity of people from thousands of years ago to now.
You're welcome.
So what would you like visitors to Massachusetts to know about the folks from Lexington, like the Chesters?
That it wasn't unusual for people to pass around children, basically for nothing. Somebody didn't want the expense of raising a child that young, given to somebody else who would increase his status by having a child like this. I would like them to know that when we get a fuller picture of how people conducted their lives, that they made the best of their circumstances. And in some cases, they were pretty successful. The Chester family, there is a Chester Road in Boxborough. Just saying.
And some of the Chester descendants you've brought to Lexington, correct?
Oh, yes, this has been very gratifying. I know a couple of present-day descendants, and one woman in particular has been the keeper of the family papers that are now in the Schlesinger Library.
And so that's what's great about this work, is that sometimes pack rats have treasures that are useful to those of us who want to learn more about how the world was, so we can make our world today better. So again, thank you both. I hope that you have been inspired by the lives of Cate and Prince Chester. These two understood the importance of creating a family without being under the tyranny of slavery. Their children benefited from their personal revolt against human bondage, and Cate and Prince's industrious nature benefited the Lexington community as its inhabitants mobilized in support of the non-importation movement. I invite you to learn more about the Black Patriots of Lexington and the other Black patriots of the Revolutionary War. These men and women were heroes and founders of our great nation, the United States of America. Till next time, I'm Sean Osborne, and thank you to the curators and researchers who make this program possible.
So these just recently were all put on YouTube, correct? Okay. All right. So we can access these. Everyone has access to them. If you can find it on YouTube, it's very easy to find if you just type in the Black Patriots of Lexington. And we also have a few flyers with some QR codes. You can just take a quick picture and it'll take you right to the link to make it really easy. So I just want to say thank you, and we're going to start the Q&A session. I've never ran a Q&A before, so I think we're all pretty comfortable at this point. We can probably just raise our hand and shout out, but we do have a microphone that we can pass around too if that makes it more comfortable.
Your chair.
What? Can you help us understand more about that property in Lexington that's owned, but it's not real property? I was kind of mystified by that, like what that might be. He's got to own that property to vote, right?
What was that voting?
Yeah. Okay.
Explain poll tax first.
Okay. Okay. When I say not real property, I'm talking about not real estate, not land, right? Yeah. So, and personal property, of course, could be any number of things. It could be probably he was paying tax on a cow. That would have been probably the best guess on that. So tell me more. What was your other question? Oh, a poll tax. Yes, poll.
Yes, it's poll tax. Explain poll tax was there.
Yes, poll taxes were assessed for every adult male in town over 16. Yes, so that was one of the things they had to pay. There was also a minister's tax. Of course, it was, it was a Puritan society based on their Puritan faith, and they were responsible for also every person for the upkeep of the minister. Does that answer your question?
Then coming out to Boxborough, do you see that he's paying tax also in Boxborough?
Well, I don't have, or I should say I haven't yet seen taxes. I haven't looked at those records in Boxborough for that period of time. I do know that they show up in the census as having property. At some point, Prince and Cate's son, Prince James, owns a farmland. At the same time, you see his son, James Sidney, owns a farm. And then separate from that was Lucy Chester's farm.
And on that point about land, one of the things that comes up as you go through the episodes, which I hope you all do, is that this is typical for people who want to move during that time period. So communities are setting their budget off of the population at that time. So when you move into the community, it is best to have someone say, Sean's with me. Do not warn Sean out. And so we have the records of people doing that. Even the minister had to say to the town, the select board, then the board of selectmen, right? This is Margaret. Margaret's just visiting, because this idea of good neighbors didn't exist. If Margaret gets sick and I bring Margaret food, I then bring that bill for my goodwill to the select board to get reimbursed. So I don't want to have random people coming into my town, right? So what you will see is people will buy land, pay taxes on that land, stay where they were, pay the poll tax, so the folks in the new place know that they are good for it. Silas Burdew, who I mentioned, he has land in New Hampshire in 75, but he's paying the poll tax in Lexington. In fact, if you look at the tax records, you will have a list of non-residents who are doing the same thing the opposite way, right? So it's part of the culture of the area that's what they're doing. So that when they do move with their kids, the folks in Boxborough/Stow aren't going, who are you and why? I want to warn you out, right? They're like, oh, right, you're the guys with the tax roll. That's great, no problem, right? So it's part of making your way into the community.
And the thing that's interesting is to what to what extent is a town going to admit that they need to support a person? And this is one of the things we find out about Prince, that in successive census reports in 1790 and 1800, he's listed as head of household with his children. And then by 1809, the town meeting records in Lexington report that they are paying for his care to his daughter, Lucy. And they continue to pay for that care until he passes away in 1811. So they are acknowledging that because he came from Lexington, that they are liable for the support of this man.
Thank you. Sir, right there.
I just looked up Boxborough. They were incorporated in 1783. So in Boxborough was incorporated in 1783. Yeah. So if you're doing tax records and property record looking up, you may want to check Stow, because Boxborough is Stow, Harvard, and Littleton. Yeah. Right. And the corner that they probably was where the Minuteman Airport was, and the northern.
So what he's saying is that they were in Stow in between 75 and 83. Check the Stow stuff. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's all.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. Not all states or all the towns weren't incorporated by 1776.
And that's why it's the Stow Boxborough Patriots, because of that. Same way that we went to Medford to talk about the Burdews, because their grandparents, Anne and Philip, were married in Medford. So thank you for that idea of incorporation and communities. And if you want to be really frightened about American history, look at Praying Towns and Natick, which is where we were on Sunday talking about John and Caesar Ferret. I saw another question over here. Yes, sir. Come here for you.
Do we have any first-person accounts of how the neighbors responded to somebody who had been a slave being freed and quote-unquote equal with them?
That is a great question. And to my knowledge, no, I don't know of any first-person accounts to talk about that. But it is interesting in the context of how the Chester family functioned within the larger community. And you saying the larger community, of course, it was an extremely small community. For many, many years, I mean, there were only 400 people in the town. No, this is Boxborough at this point, yeah. So just to give you an idea of the context, the thing about the family is, to me is telling, okay? Their second daughter, Lucy, had a relationship with a white man. His name was Whitney, okay? Whitney acknowledged the child that was born of that union. Her name was, wait for it, Lucy Whitney Chester, okay? And we have him acknowledging his responsibility for this child. And guess what? It shows up even in the town meeting records in Lexington. And this goes back to the whole idea of who is liable, which town is liable for the support of a person. There is a specific, I saw this not too long ago, there's a specific reference to Lexington being held innocent of liability for the support of Lucy Whitney Chester, because I think his name was Joshua. But this Whitney man had already paid money to Boxborough. So they were not going to be liable for this. But my point is that you had a mixing of families. And this is interesting, too. This is one of the ways I think Whitney's come into this. Dorothy Taylor's maiden name was Whitney. Okay? So, and this was Cate. These were the people who enslaved and raised Cate. So this Whitney family would have been known to all these people. And that's a basic all. Does that kind of give you an idea? It's this kind of thing where you have to step back and see what you find out from the picture and then make some observations and make some guesses.
Well, I know that a number of the black people who fought in the Revolution were following their masters with the hope that at the end they would be freed. Yeah. And I didn't know how that would stack up with the masters later on to have their former slaves now be quote unquote equal.
Okay, so let's go with your first question. So the one thing that's interesting about your question about how did the community respond. So I was doing some research and I stumbled across a community late 1700s in Connecticut that was violently opposed to having a black person move in. So a Revolutionary War veteran was manumitted afterwards or was manumitted after 1783. Either way, he has money and he has his freedom. And he purchases land in this community in Connecticut. They have a public meeting and recorded vote that says, we do not want this black person in this town. That is then upheld by the state of Connecticut, and he moves elsewhere. So people are not always sweet and loving. So we say, what happened in Boxborough, what happened in Stow, what happens in Lexington? Because there are communities that aren't open to that. Now for the other part. It's interesting, your question about enslaved people following their masters in the war. Some. I don't. There aren't enough that I've come across for that to really be as big a conversation as what about the enslaved people who fought instead and then were not given their freedom, or the enslaved people like, who's the guy who shot Alexander Hamilton? Aaron Burr, exactly. Aaron Burr had a brother. His brother had a bad habit of enslaving people. His enslaved person, because people are so strange in this fine country, had the same name. First and last name. The enslaved and the enslaver. The British regulars say, if you leave your position of enslavement and come fight for us, we will free you. So he says, pardon me. His enslaver says, I need some friends to go bring him back. So they do. They bring him back to enslavement, take away his bonus pay, and then say, you should fight for us because we want to get rid of tyranny. And if you survive, we'll give you your freedom. And he says, I will survive. And then I'm going to do George Washington, and I'm going to find a landed widow. And he did. He found a landed widow who happened to be a Native American woman. And that's, so it's, I like, that's the story. I'm always like, how do we do that? And then you have, I'll come to the name. There's a family in Maine, Petersham, right? So Peters does follow his enslaver into war. Then his enslaver, who's an officer in the from the South Shore of Massachusetts, says, let's go to Maine. And they go to Maine, and he says, here's 100 acres. And one of the largest free black communities in the late 1700s is that family and the folks they invite in. And so you have these stories of Burr and then Peters, and then you have that middle area. But I thought you were going to go with the other side, which is why after Prince Chester is freed, and then I'm asked the question of why does he stay in Lexington, right? And then why do the folks who knew him as free labor pay him, right? Make that change. I think somebody had an answer before I started the video. Anyone have an answer? Because I always wonder. Yes, sir. No, he was not. Go through it again. His freedom. How's he freed?
Oh, Prince was enslaved by one of the members of the Stone family. This particular man was named Samuel Stone. There were two other Samuels that went back, but this particular man, Samuel Stone, acknowledged that Prince was enslaved by him. Well, we don't know. We don't know the answer to how or what. Yes, that's right. He was manumitted before Stone died in 1768. And the reason I know that is that Samuel Stone left a will. Not everybody left wills. And well, of course, that's true today, right? But because he left a will and because Prince was not in the inventory, we know by that time he was no longer enslaved by Samuel Stone, right? If people were enslaved and the person dies and has a will, you always see that person in the inventory, valued along with other property. So, what else?
Yes.
Did Samuel Stone pay Lexington a bond? Did you see in paperwork, wasn't that also a thing that was required effectively to sort of buffer against the poor rolls and say, I'm going to manumit this person, but you have to put up a bond for them?
Yes, that's a common thing. I don't know. I have no idea. No.
It's a really good question. So 50 pounds was the going rate for your bond. And the payment is usually appears to be a separate agreement. And I don't know where it comes in because I've never seen it. If you watch the Pomp Blackman episode, he is manumitted by will. So his enslaver says 4 weeks, I believe it is 4 weeks, 2 months after I die or my wife dies, then he is free. Oh, by the way, to make sure that my lovely thick-headed children don't change their minds, they are going to sign this as well. But there's nothing about, because that's a different agreement, right? So the one agreement is with the family. This piece of property doesn't go to you. On the other hand, the bond is with the town, right? So that receipt's a different conversation. On the other hand, Fisk, another Pomp, Pompey Fisk of Fisk Hill, Fisk Hill, Lieutenant, right? In the will for him and Phyllis, who's also enslaved, it says, Lieutenant Ebenezer Fisk says, Phyllis, the young girl, Negro girl Phyllis, will go to my wife upon my death. And the Negro boy Pompey will go to my son and his successors. So, to her point, the wills are really important for tracking. Now, the two enslaved people who were in the Fisk household beforehand who likely died, they aren't there. Those are all guesses. Those are my guesses, my summations. So there's a lot of blank spots. But I've yet to see, and if anybody has, I'd love to see how you found it. I've yet to see that 50 pounds, like a record of that. But if anybody has, I'd love to see it. Maybe I can find it elsewhere as well. But great question. So you're right.
So you asked a question of the audience, and I have two potential tracks on that. Skilled labor. If Prince is skilled in a certain task, I remember hearing a story about the gentleman, I think he's coined the phrase as the male Harriet Tubman, the gentleman that founded the colony up in Canada. I can't remember his name. He was a skilled blacksmith. And he was promised his manumission, but of course his owner reneged, and that's why he escaped to Canada. But the other thing is, if you're living in a subsistence community, every able-bodied person that is able to contribute, you tend to use Dr. King's phrase, you tend to value the content of their character. So that could perhaps be, too, is that every able-bodied person in a subsistence community like Stow or Lexington was valued beyond the prejudices that had been hard-boiled into people.
No, I think that's a really good observation. And this speaks to something that is really important to me when I do this kind of research. I'm always looking for the person instead of the idea. You can talk about, for example, you can talk about slavery, or you can talk about freedom. You can talk about people who were enslaved. You can talk about people who were enslavers. All of that is true, but until you are able to actually tell a story about particular people, there's not enough depth to what you might have to say. And your point, I think, goes well into the idea of the question about, what did we think? What did the white people in Boxborough think about this black family? Well, it's interesting, too, because Lucy Hager, I know many of you are familiar with her, and she's a very good source. She talks about how respected and valued the people in Boxborough. They valued people in the Chester family. And I think that's really telling. So that really does. It speaks to what you're saying. And it speaks to the whole idea of individuals as opposed to just a concept.
I'll throw out another theory that came to me as you were speaking. Because I really, I want to hear what your thoughts are about why they're doing that. But in the context of these conversations, another possibility is pecuniary. It's about the money. So, I've enslaved Margaret. You all know I've enslaved Margaret. I've manumitted Margaret. I gave my 50 pounds to the town. We as a community are responsible for Margaret until she dies. So Margaret can hang out and have us pay for her food and lodging, or Margaret can work. And therefore there's an exchange between what she does for you and what you give her, because we don't want Margaret hanging out in our town because we can't give her to somebody else, right? We cannot give her to someone else. On the other hand, for the teachers in the room, William Diamond, remember William Diamond, the drummer boy, 16 years old or so? His sister was a teacher in Lexington and was not making enough money to make it, so she gets warned out. I know you're shocked to hear that, but she got warned out of Lexington because she wasn't from there. They could kick her out, right? So there's also that, right? That if you're manumitted within the town, right, which is different than 1783. Right, switching. In 1783, all bets are off. There is no hometown for the formerly enslaved person to say, take care of me. So you took care of yourself, you found folks who paid for you, or you ended up being warned out. And you weren't the only ones who were warned out, because they were still warning out white folks too. So another slice. So one more question before we head home. No questions? No questions for the descendants? Nothing at all? Okay, I have one. Pardon me, ma'am. As a fiber artist, I watched you smiling at certain parts of the film. Could you share your thoughts about the fiber arts and the skill sets of Prince and Cate?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
That's quite a question. Well, in terms of my personal background, I grew up in a household where we needed to be resourceful. I grew up in Harvard, Massachusetts. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, my great-grandmother is the daughter of a Lucy Whitney, Martha Ann Hazard. And I grew up in a culture where you make do, you're resourceful, and sewing, basket making. I learned how to spin as a young child. All those skills that are traditional arts were part of my upbringing. Knitting, sewing, all of it. I leave, go away to college, come back as the art teacher in Harvard. And what do? I decide to go to Iceland and learn how to become a master felter, write a grant, and bring a full fiber arts program to Harvard. So I'm now retired, and for the past 3 years, I've leaned into my life skill or passion as a full-on fiber artist in my studio in Groton, Mass. It's called Marigold. My husband and I have a garden where I cultivate plants for my natural dyes, for my fiber. He built me a greenhouse so I could have indigo, because I have recently learned that the so-called Negro cloth was dyed in indigo. So really, it was people of color that started denim, not in France, denim. So I'm currently working on a couple of quilts. One is using denim, and it will speak to sundown towns, where I put zip codes of all the Massachusetts sundown towns. I recently had a quilt accepted into weaving in a dress, which is at the Umbrella Arts in Concord. It tells the story of Brister Freeman. I used plant dyes, I hand stitched, I embroidered, I sought out as authentic as possible cloth that speaks to the story of Brister Freeman. If you have a chance, it's up till June 14th. And I'm full on into authenticity with the cloth to try and bring it to that time as realistic as possible. Did I go on too long? No.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to the descendants of the Black residents of Lexington of the 1700s. No. Descendants of. Yes. We don't really talk about anything outside of 128. I'm not really sure why I'm here, but in the hinterlands, but no. Yes, I did. Yes, 128. I drove by it on the way in. I had to look at it. It was great. It was a great house. I loved the community. But when I married my wife, and she was coming from Cambridge, and she said, exactly. She said, "This is great to visit you, but I can't stay here." So he found that middle ground of Lexington. But it's this through line, which I appreciate you sharing, of the skill set, and then passing that on, that understanding that the skills from Central Europe and the Mesopotamian Delta and the Nile Delta being passed to North America, and then you going to Iceland and bringing that to Harvard, right? This is the beauty of humanity. We can do a lot of mixing and sharing of skills without causing harm. On the other hand, it is much more fun and much more likely that we will do that while causing harm. And so it's being able to tell both stories so that people get a sense that they have a choice. It's not a natural inclination. And so I thank you for choosing to share this time with us and to share these stories. Please share the links. We now have 2,000 views for all 9 episodes combined. This episode is the most popular. I don't know if it's a Stow thing or a Boxborough thing. I think it's the Michelle Parrish hands-on portion that people really love. It's the only one that has that hands-on portion. But please watch the others anyway. You know, you've seen this one. But share it. I'd love to have each of them at 2,000 by the end of the year. And you can incorporate them into your classrooms, into your discussions, and give me your feedback as well about how else we can build upon these stories, because when we talk about patriots, it's not just the soldiers, it's also the civilians that do their job, right? When we talk about the daughters of the revolution and sons of the revolution, they weren't all soldiers. So think about that as well when you think about the black residents of Massachusetts during the next 8 months or so of our 10 months, or 250th up till April 19 of 2026. Again, thank you.